Hey family, I've got a question for you. Have you ever at any point in time found yourself given over to a spirit of worry? Before you answer, let me give you a definition. To worry is to torment oneself with cares and anxieties. For some, this can be a slippery slope that leads to many other overwhelming emotions and disorders to the point of losing sleep, appetite, developing headaches, or even high blood pressure, while others may only struggle with it mildly or just for a season. If you answered yes, this devotion is for you. If you answered no, it's still for you. For one, seasons change. And for two, you never know who the Lord may lead you to share this with. Ultimately, the result is always the same, whether you struggle with worry a little or a lot. Worry won't help. Luke 12:25 and 26 reads, "And which of you, with taking thought, can add to his stature 1 cubit? If ye then be not able to do that thing which is least, why take ye thought for the rest?" In other words, your worries can't add a single moment to your life. So if it's a waste of time to worry about a little thing like that, why worry about bigger things? Worrying is such an easy thing to do though. Believe me, I know. Stress can cause anxiety in a number of ways and for a number of reasons. And while COVID-19 is a hot topic right now, let's be honest, it's not the only thing people are worrying about. Before this pandemic even started, people were already busy worrying, whether it was a bill they couldn't pay, a job they couldn't keep, or a relationship they couldn't save. All are stressful circumstances, and it does make sense to be worried, maybe even natural. But what is worry, and what does worry do? The word worry comes from an Old English word meaning to choke or to strangle. And that's exactly what worrying does to us. For example, I'm not a great test taker, never have, but I've gotten better over the years. Granted, I've never even failed a test, but it's still been a struggle to get through the experience. Even when I've studied long and hard and taken every caution to be prepared, I will still find myself wide awake the night before obsessing over it, unable to think about anything else. This was my life all during high school and through college. Even after taking the exam, I would find myself worried sick over the grade that I was going to get. It was excruciating, and it left me feeling like I was choking on the air around me. I remember once I was agonizing over an English exam, and my grandma was firing off a series of questions at me. Did you study? Did you try your best? Did you pray about it? And I'd answer yes to all of her questions, and she'd say, then you did what you could, and there's no need to worry. But hours later, I'd still be carrying on about how my near-perfect GPA was going to suffer if I didn't get the right score on my exam. And then she'd give me an ultimatum. If you're going to worry about it, don't pray. And if you've prayed about it, don't worry. When my grandma told me that, she wasn't trying to offend me. She was simply speaking from a place of absolute conviction. For years, my grandma worried herself in and out of the hospital over past due bills and empty cupboards. Really, it was like her body had worn itself out worrying about things beyond her control. Now, she was faithful. She was faithful in her giving, her church attendance, and her prayer life. But she struggled a lot to manage her finances, which affected a lot of other areas of our lives. Perhaps she didn't know how. Either way, it began to take a toll on her health. I know there was a lot going on behind the scenes that I didn't know about, being that I was a child and all, but I do remember that it seemed like her medical emergencies almost always occurred either just before or right after she'd gone to bed. I think that it was when she was left alone with her thoughts and her fears that her heart would begin to race and the wind would leave her lungs and she'd be gasping for air and calling out for help at the same time. It was awful. And like clockwork, we called the ambulance, and then by morning, we'd be standing by her hospital bedside. It had more or less become a routine. She had always been a hard worker, but as she got older, she wasn't able to do that. In desperate times, she had fallen in the habit of writing bad checks to keep utilities from being disconnected and to buy groceries, and then couldn't bear the weight that it left on her conscience. But she really did feel like it was necessary in order to provide for her family. She was only doing what she thought she needed to do to take care of her children. I mean, her intentions really were in the right place, but it still didn't make it right, and we all knew it. We had a family intervention and everything. I mean, her children all called and reached out to plead with her to stop before she got herself in a real bind. And it was really her worst fear come to realization. It was a whole thing, and I can't really say for sure, but I feel like she felt like her situation was unique and nobody understood where she was coming from. But she would have been wrong if she had thought that, because she wasn't the first person to struggle in this way. None of us are, and the Bible even says so. 2 Kings chapter 7 gives an account of 4 starving lepers. They were outside the entering of the gate and had up until now survived on leftover scraps thrown to them from within. But with the famine in the city, there were no scraps to be given, and the 4 diseased men were dying of hunger. Brought face to face with death, these hungry, diseased, isolated men were faced to consider their position. What could they do? If they stayed where they were, they would die. If they entered into the city where there was no food, they'd still die. So the only alternative they had was to go into the enemy's camp. And they put this decision off for as long as they possibly could. But it really was their only chance of survival. Suppose the Syrians kill them. Well, then they're no worse off than they were before. But maybe, just maybe, the Syrians will take pity on them and keep them alive, in which case they'd survive. Now that slim chance might have been very faint, but it was the only one they had, and with that they set out for the enemy's camp. As they made their way, the Lord, on their behalf, made the host of the Syrians to hear chariots and horses and the sounds of a great army approaching. In fear, the Syrians fled. They abandoned their camp and left everything behind, including their food. Now, I've heard this topic preached, honestly, more times than I can count. But yet, when I read this in preparation for this devotion, something new stood out to me that I hadn't really noticed before. The food that was left behind was already prepared. The tables were already set. The Lord provided for them and made provision for them. I mean, there was nothing else that those lepers had to do. They did what they could, and the Lord took care of the rest. Now, God is no respecter of persons. And what he did for those 4 hungry lepers, he did for my grandma and her children. Here you had an elderly woman who was sick in her body and unable to work. As such, she and her grandchildren were beneficiaries of the government having only what was given to them. Foster care subsidies, free school meals, Social Security, etc. But honestly, it had never been enough. It wasn't uncommon for utility companies to threaten to disconnect service due to non-payment, and it seemed like no matter the amount of groceries she bought was ever enough food to feed the group of growing children in her house. But she had already proven to herself that she could not continue on in that way. She had to make a decision. Either pray and do something or worry and do nothing. She chose to pray and do something. It wasn't enough for the lepers to just say they were going to go to the enemy's camp. They had to actually make the journey there. And my grandma also had to take a stand and follow through on her own journey. She stopped pouring her energy into worrying about things beyond her control. I mean, she couldn't compel the government to give her more money, and she wasn't well enough in her body to go out and work for it herself. So she really had to learn to make do with what she had without sinning. Immediately, she stopped writing checks that she couldn't back up. She knew it was a sin to be deceptive, and she quit cold turkey. I remember once at the grocery store, we were buying some groceries to get through the end of the month, and I think we had a gallon of milk, 2 loaves of bread, and a carton of eggs. Couldn't have been more than $6. She took all of the cash that she had in her purse and put it on the counter, which was only 2 $1 bills. Then she took out her coin purse, and she proceeded to count out the remaining $4 in change. And I'm telling you right now, there were not a lot of quarters. My older brother was there with us, and he was embarrassed out of his mind. I mean, he was in high school after all. And he just began to beg and plead with her, "Grandma, please just write a check. I know we don't have the money, but just write a check. Just this one time. Please, I promise I'll never ask again." But instead, you know what my grandmother did? She slowed down her counting pace, and she began to just whisper a prayer underneath her breath after every coin that she laid on a counter. It was a moment that I've never forgotten. I'm not going to lie to you, family. Everything wasn't perfect after that, but it did change my life for the better forever. We still struggled in many ways after that, but the air around us, it felt different. We could breathe easier knowing that God was on our side and our situation was no longer hopeless. Witnessing my grandma's triumph all those years ago is what put me on the path to trusting the Lord to care for my physical needs just as much as my spiritual needs. Fast forward to 2020, here I am, happily married with 2 beautiful children, and I have a million things that I can worry about as a wife and a mother. Bills, laundry, childcare, car troubles, work troubles, ministry troubles, dog troubles, just to name a few. I mean, the list goes on. And sometimes I feel like worry finds me and seeks me out even when I'm not looking for it. But everyone has a struggle. It's not all the same, but we all have something. And my grandma and I did share in this struggle with worry. My past is riddled with moments where I was crippled and paralyzed by worry, and it cost me many friendships and peaceful moments over the years. But by God's grace, I've been able to confront my relationship with worry and call it for what it is. Useless. When I was a child, I thought as a child, and as such, I thought I wasn't blessed because I didn't have everything that I wanted. But as a baptized in Jesus' name, filled with the Holy Ghost adult, I can see that the only thing I needed was what I had: a praying grandmother. I don't ever, not once, remember being hungry, homeless, cold, dirty, or unloved. I was covered in prayer daily and encouraged in my faith at every turn. This story that I've shared is just a snapshot of a moment in time where it seemed like worry ruled our lives. But God. I said it in the beginning, worry won't help anything ever. It won't help you find a solution to your problem, and it won't improve your circumstances. The key to overcoming worry is putting your faith in God and your energy in submitting to His will. The ugly truth is, our worry really stems from a place of selfishness. It's our fear that God won't give us what we want when we want it. But His ways are not our ways. And consider this: the wildflowers in the fields and the sparrows in the skies, all carefully attended to by the God of the universe. Do you truly believe that God cares any less for you? Not a chance. I pray that your heart will begin to submit to God's will for your life. You got to release the worry. You have to release the fear about your tomorrow and start today loving God with your whole heart. If you allow yourself to be overwhelmed by His agenda for your life, I promise you, you won't have time to worry over yours. I love you all, and God bless.